Everyone deserves to have an endocrinologist to fully understand all of the amazing metabolic processes that our bodies are performing. I'm Dr. Lindsay Van Dyke, and this is the Endo Days. Welcome back, and as always, thank you for joining me for a discussion about all things hormonal on the Endo Days. Today, we're going to review a super hot topic, bioidentical hormone therapy. This is an extensive discussion, so one episode isn't going to cut it. I'm going to break it down into several pieces. So part 1 will be about the definitions of bioidentical hormones. Part 2 will look at the roles of compounding pharmacies as well as the FDA. And part 3 will investigate the recommendations for estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and thyroid hormone replacements. This is important because that term bioidentical means different things to different people. So we're going to dissect these different meanings and review both the evidence and the guidelines by the authorities in this field. Then we will navigate how bioidentical hormones are available for treatment, when they are indicated, when they are not safe, and touch on how much they cost. This is all very complicated, but it's very important because it's not always clear to the patient. And woe to the patient who's led astray by an inexperienced or an unscrupuled provider. We all know the number one rule of doctoring is first, do no harm, right? That is the fundamental tenet of the Hippocratic Oath. Today, I want to make sure that you are able to advocate for yourself and avoid harm. So let's start with some vocabulary. Bioidentical. What does that even mean anyway? Let's talk about the literal meaning first. In this sense, the term bioidentical refers to a hormone of non-human origin. Most often, we're referring to a lab-produced hormone that truly is the exact same chemical structure as the hormone that our body makes by itself. The best example of this is the thyroid hormone. We can compare diagrams of the chemical compound of human thyroid hormone, which is called T4, to the lab-created version, which we call levothyroxine, or is known in other brand names as levothyroid or synthroid, etc. And we can see that these absolutely overlap perfectly with one another. There is not a single molecule out of place. Why do we care about this? Well, it matters because a hormone is like a key. Hormones work just like keys in that they unlock certain activities within a cell or a tissue by fitting neatly into the lock that was designed for it. So that is the proper, literal, scientific meaning of the term bioidentical. Keep it in mind as we move on to what I call the social definitions of bioidentical. Before we go any further, though, I need you to know that it turns out some hormones are a little promiscuous, meaning that they can partly fit into another receptor lock and still produce a response. A really good example of this is the hormone HCG. This rises dramatically in early pregnancy. HCG's job is to protect and maintain the pregnancy, but it also can cross-react with the thyroid receptors so the developing fetus can get enough thyroid hormone even before it has its own thyroid gland. It's so vital that HCG is promiscuous in this way because thyroid hormone is one of those things that you cannot live without. Another good example is Premarin. Menopausal women are familiar with this product. It's made up of several estrogens that we obtain from female horses. It's not identical to our estrogens that we make, but when humans use this medication, our body's enzymes can convert it to different types of estrogens that do fit into our estrogen receptor locks. Okay, so now that we have these basic principles behind us, let's explore what the term bioidentical means in the social sense or from a marketing point of view. While it typically means everything that we just referred to, the implications are much, much larger. Rarely are these things stated out loud, but the suggestions of them are clearly there. I want to go through them one by one. First, there is the suggestion that bioidentical hormones are a custom compounded mixture of many hormones, that these hormones are better than any synthetically produced hormone, and that they are better than any hormone treatments that have been approved by the FDA. Remember, these things are never stated out loud, but they are implied. Second, The term usually also implies the need for ongoing testing and sampling of various fluids, sometimes blood, sometimes saliva, sometimes hair follicles, in order to adjust the treatment and maintain certain hormone levels in the body. Third, the term also suggests that use of these compounds are designed to mimic the hormone mixtures and levels that we had during our young adult years, and that treatment should be designed and adjusted to achieve this goal in order to avoid aging. Fourth, and the most dangerous, is the unspoken implication that these formulas are low risk or risk-free, and that to ignore the FDA recommendations is an important form of self-advocacy. That's a lot of stuff to take in all at once, so I want to unpack these ideas one by one. But before we get started, I want to tell you a quick story first. Back when I was a junior fellow in endocrinology at the University of New Mexico, the chief of our department pulled me into his office early on in my fellowship, and he laid down the law. He said, "What we do as endocrinologists is complicated and affects all aspects of medicine. Therefore, I don't care what you think. I don't care what somebody taught you. I only care what the data shows. So if I ask you a question, I expect you to go directly to the source in the scientific literature to answer it. No more, no less." And that brief conversation was terrifying to me at the time. It invoked all these feelings of inadequacy and fear that I would not measure up to his expectations and I would lose my fellowship position. But he was right. He was 100% right. Because there are so many falsehoods and lies that get perpetuated that it's dangerous to the patients. It's even worse if we as the doctors fail to recognize and eliminate the falsehoods, or even worse still, that we perpetuate them ourselves. Because, first, do no harm, right? All right. Now let's dissect these 4 implications of bioidentical hormone therapy. First up, that idea that custom compounded hormone mixtures are the best way to treat hormone insufficiencies. Well, what does the data say? That's the problem, because the data is sparse at best. There is a lack of randomized controlled trials that can validate the quality of the compounded products, the safety of those products, their adequacy, or even superiority of those products compared to the current standards of medical practice. What studies are available for review are of limited or poor quality. In some cases, there literally is zero data at all to support the claims that are being made. And so I caution patients every day. It is so vital to our safety and optimal health that medical care is based on solid evidence. You don't want us treating you with things that we think might be right or seemed to work for me. You want to know that what you're getting is safe, and you want to know that it's the most effective thing that we have to offer for you. Second up, let's talk about this idea that ongoing tests are required to quote-unquote balance hormones or target specific therapy. This can be quite a can of worms. What I want you to know is that when we examine the guidelines by the expert professional societies, and those societies or organizations like the American College of OB-GYNs, the Endocrine Society, the American Thyroid Association, the North American Menopause Society, and many more, the recommendations made in most cases is against ongoing testing. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, and those depend on the individual patient and the specific condition being treated, of course. The recommendations that these societies make are based on the available pool of scientific studies, the quality of their evidence, and their long-term outcome data. It takes a lot of people in a small room for a long period of time to reach these conclusions and publish that information for us. Here's another really important thing that I want patients to be aware of, and that is that not all lab tests are created equal. We kind of assume that when we go have a lab tested that they're all the same and we can trust all the same data. Well, there are many different fluids that can be sampled: blood, urine, saliva, the hair follicles we mentioned, etc. But whether the test is going to be accurate or not is going to depend on any or all of the following items. 1, the tissue or fluid that is being sampled. 2, the type of test that is being run on the sample. And for all of us geeks out there, we want to know, Is the test a radioimmunoassay? Is it a liquid chromatography? Is it equilibrium dialysis? Which type of test is appropriate for which sample? And that answer is different for different hormones. 3. The lab that is running the test. 4. The time of day that the sample was collected. 5. The timing of a menstrual cycle during sample collection. 6. The timing of hormone treatment during sample collection. 7. The interactions of other medications the patient is taking on the sample and its test result. 8. The way the sample was handled after it was drawn from the patient. And 9. The context of other hormone levels at the time that target level was drawn. These are just 9 examples. There are many more things that impact these levels, and I can't underscore that enough. All right, so now here we are at the third implication, and that was that the point of hormone treatment is to reclaim youth and avoid aging. So let's go back for a moment to those lab tests that we just talked about, those 9 points. I think you can see this is complicated, and that's why it takes at least 5 years of extra training after medical school to become an expert in hormones. There is no one type of test that can accommodate all of these things, and the more tests that are run inappropriately, the bigger that can of worm gets. And I see it all the time. Patients get frustrated, they get mad, and then they feel hopeless. And so, that is why many of the guidelines advocate for treatment that targets alleviating symptoms, not to mimic youthful levels or prevent aging, because those things are all highly complex and they frequently either are not achievable or they pose unnecessary risk in order to achieve them. And that brings us to part 4, the implication that bioidentical hormone therapy is low risk, risk-free, or at least less risky than what the FDA recommends. And I am so sorry, but it just isn't true. Everything we introduce into our body, from medication to foods to water, they all carry a risk. Take the wrong medication and you could get mildly ill, markedly injured, or you could die. Eat enough of the wrong foods, I promise you, you will earn yourself heart attacks and strokes, diabetes, etc. If you drink too much water too fast, you can die from dangerous changes to your blood's electrolytes, like sodium. The line between thriving and becoming seriously ill is quite thin, and this is the whole reason that the FDA exists, to protect us from harm based on the evidence. Now, I want to take a step back here, because obviously the FDA is not foolproof, but it's important to know that when you compare the standards of the FDA to those of other countries, it is very clear that the FDA standards are extremely rigorous. That's part of why it takes so much longer for a medication to get approval here compared to in Europe, for example. Why don't we look at what the FDA says about this topic? And this is taken directly from their menopause fact sheet, which you can find at www.fda.gov. It says, and I quote, "The FDA does not have evidence that compounded bioidentical hormones are safe and effective, or safer or more effective than FDA-approved hormone therapy. FDA has approved drugs containing hormones that are identical to the hormones made naturally by women in their reproductive years." The research, of course, at the FDA and in other institutions is ongoing. The most recent project I could find was started by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in September of 2018, and their job is to evaluate the safety and efficacy of compounded hormone therapies, and they will report to us whether the evidence supports the use of these therapies. So in conclusion, no matter where your hormones come from, absolutely none of them are risk-free. In order to calculate that best ratio of risk to benefit, you need a lot of strong scientific data, and that comes from the FDA. It also takes a skilled professional with specialized training to thoroughly examine the risks that are relevant to you and to make the best choice for you. That's all I want to include in part 1 for this series about bioidentical hormones, but we will continue this discussion with more details about the role of the FDA, the role of compounding pharmacies, and how to be your own best advocate to make safe, reliable, and cost-effective decisions. In the meantime, you can refer to other episodes of the Endo Days about menopausal hormone replacement, testosterone replacement, thyroid dysfunctions, and adrenal insufficiency. I also want to be sure that you have access to some reliable resources that you can read to get more information about hormone replacement in an easy-to-interpret manner. First, you can always go to www.mayoclinic.org, and if you keyword search the phrase hormone therapy, is it right for you? It will pull up that article. Secondly, you can always go to www.nih.gov and keyword search menopausal hormone therapy. This will bring up several lists of resources for information, and these are all broken down by subject. So please do read them, be informed, ask good questions, and until we talk again, be well.